Hey, welcome back to the channel. This is part 2 to What If Naruto Took After Zabuza. This will be chapter 4 through 7 if you wish to follow along. Don't forget to subscribe and enjoy. The third morning, Naruto was awakened by the sound of mayhem on the lower floor. He had been up most of the night practicing Kirigakure no Jutsu. He had arrived at Tizuna's just in time for dinner and had left right after, mainly because dinner had mostly consisted of the various family members ogling his new hair and cloths. He started practicing at the waterfront and quickly got the jutsu to work. It was an easy technique when compared to the Kage Bunshin or Rasengan, but controlling the mist effectively required a lot of chakra control. What this essentially meant was that he couldn't control the mist too well, but he got a lot of it. By the end of the night, he had managed to perform the jutsu using only a bucket of water, but he had a feeling it would be a while before he could pull it off using just the water in the air. More important now, however, was getting breakfast. Naruto slid on his pants and went downstairs, greeted by the sounds of Tsunami fighting her usual battle to get Inari ready for school on time. Watching her, Naruto figured she would have made a pretty good kunoichi. "Inari," she hollered, "how many times have I told you to stop throwing those knives?" Naruto walked into the kitchen to find himself facing a number of steak knives embedded in the wall. He idly noted that considering Inari's position relative to that of the knives, the kid had pretty good aim. Naruto had the momentary image of a future battle. 10-10, Weapons Master versus Inari, Kitchen Knife Ninja. He laughed to himself, causing the room's other two occupants to finally notice him. "Oh, good morning, Naruto-kun," Tsunami greeted while simultaneously trying to get Inari to stay still and eat his breakfast. This, of course, was quickly becoming impossible once Inari noticed his idol had entered the room, so Naruto decided he better calm things down. "Nah, Inari, you really should eat your breakfast. If you don't, you'll be late for school, and if you're late for school, you'll be in even more trouble," Naruto reasoned. Inari seemed to process this for a moment, but Naruto made sense and his desire to please both his mother and idol overcame his defiance, so he grumblingly sat down and started to eat. Tsunami looked gratefully to Naruto before walking over and starting to yank knives out of the wall. "Naruto-kun," she said as she pulled out another knife, "there's some breakfast for you there too. I made pancakes." Naruto was in awe. He had never had pancakes made for him. He pretty much just eaten ramen in Kono. Crap, he had managed to avoid thinking about Konoha until now. He refused to feel guilty about leaving. Feeling guilty led to thoughts about the people who would feel betrayed, and he refused to call what he had done betrayal. Betrayal implied that he owed something to Konoha and the people who lived there. He continued down this thought path and Tsunami could only watch as Naruto looked more and more depressed. She then grabbed him firmly by the hand, jolting him out of his reverie, and dragged him over to the table. "Sit," she commanded, so he sat next to Inari and waited only moments before a plate of pancakes were put in front of him. He grabbed his fork and decided to thoroughly enjoy this kind of food while he had it to eat. Good food wouldn't be common in a life of traveling and hiding. Breakfast was soon finished and Inari left for school right after. Naruto then quickly helped Tsunami clean up the breakfast dishes and then retreated to his room. Now again left to his own devices, he snuck out onto the roof and grabbed Kubikiri from where he hidden it the day before. Hefting the sword over his shoulder, he jumped down to the street and headed for the forest. Upon reaching a spot that he felt was sufficiently secluded, he unwrapped the sword with a flick of his wrist and started some basic swings, trying to get a feel for the balance of the blade. After just an hour, Naruto realized he had some serious muscle building due to. He could lift the sword with one hand, but couldn't control it very well. His movements were choppy and predictable, particularly when he had to reverse direction. Another hour passed and Naruto discovered another problem. His small stature made it almost impossible to do any kind of upward cut. He would need to be at least a foot taller. He pondered over this conundrum for a few minutes, and after some experimentation, found that he could jump while swinging to give him the extra height he needed. Naruto was, as always, obsessively persistent with his training, and he was happy with his improvement by the time noon rolled around. He had decided that on the way back to Tizuna's for lunch he would stop at Soba Akira's shop. It was on the way, and Naruto wanted to meet the man as soon as possible. The shop was easy enough to find and appeared to be just a mid-sized building with a sign out front announcing the place as Soba's Stone and Metal Workshop. Naruto jumped onto the roof and hid Kubikiri. He didn't want to scare the man. He jumped back down and noticed that the front door was held open with a brick, so he just walked in. Directly in front of him was a rather messy desk, covered in papers, and a bell with a label that said "Ring for Service." Behind the desk, the room opened up into a cement-floored workshop covered in tools Naruto couldn't name, as well as pieces of stone and metal in various stages of carving. Naruto shrugged and rung the bell. A sharp ding reverberated through the building, and Naruto heard some shuffling. A man in his late 20s or early 30s emerged from the back of the shop wearing a leather apron. He seemed a little rough around the edges, but his brown hair was neatly cut and he had an air of tidiness. "Can I help you?" he asked Naruto with a salesman's smile. "Maybe," Naruto cautiously replied. "I needed 2 gravestones for dome friends of mine, but don't have too much money. I was wondering if maybe I could help you out in the shop as payment." Soba looked skeptical. "Work here as payment? Do you have any experience with stone or metalworking?" "Something like that," Naruto replied with a grin. "Take me to a block that you need a lot of stone removed from, and I'll show you." Akira led him to a block of stone 5 feet high, with lines already drawn to show where stone had to be cut away. Naruto held out his hand and started to mold his chakra in the familiar swirling pattern. He opened the floodgates, pouring chakra into the now reasonably sized vortex in his hand. "Rasengan," he called as he slammed the orb into the stone block. It took a little less than 30 seconds to grind away most of the unneeded stone. He turned to Akira, who was mumbling to himself with a dumb smile on his face, something about increasing production by 50. Akira soon snapped out of it and grabbed hold of Naruto's arm. "I'll pay you 2,000 yen an hour. When can you start?" he asked excitedly. "Right now," Naruto replied with his trademark fox grin. He would later realize that with his new look, said grin made him look frightening rather than cute, but Akira appeared mostly unfazed. Naruto was expecting requests to use the Rasengan again. What he got instead was a 2.5-hour lesson about every tool a carver could ever need and the various ways to use them. Though Naruto was impatient, his respect for the man went up a few notches. He was containing his excitement and making sure Naruto knew what he was doing before he unleashed him on the shop. Akira himself mentioned an experience he had had proving just how dangerous sandpaper could be. By the time Naruto's comprehensive tour of the shop was finished, then sun had set and Naruto realized that he had missed lunch again. It was starting to become a habit with him. It was like fate. Every time lunch came around, something important would come up that would end up taking forever, and here he was, starving by the end of the day. He looked at Akira only to realize that the man had been talking to him while he was pondering his hunger. Having no idea what had been said, Naruto just nodded vigorously, which seemed to be the correct response. "So, you'll start work when tomorrow?" Akira asked. Naruto thought for a minute. "I'll be here at noon. I'm busy in the morning, so I'll work from 1 to 6 o'clock. Sound good?" Akira nodded. "Yes, that should work nicely. We'll also need to discuss the details of your order." Naruto nodded as he turned to leave. "Okay then, Akira-san. 1 o'clock it is." Akira grinned as the boy ran off into the distance. That kid's weird energy ball thing would cut his production time in half. He was already drooling. Naruto waited until Akira had turned and gone into the shop before doubling back to pick up Kubikiri. It wouldn't be good to forget it. Naruto ran all the way home, as he was now temporarily calling Tizuna's house. The day had gone as well as he could have hoped and better. He now had a job that was both training and paid better than being a ninja ever had. He could even move his plans forward, maybe as much as 3 weeks. Between the 18,000 yen he had left over from shopping and a month's salary at 10,000 yen a day, he would be set for quite some time. Naruto jumped up to the roof, hid Kubikiri, slipped down to his window, and climbed inside. He figured he had 40 minutes before supper, and there was something he needed to do. He sat on his bed and took his forehead protector out of his pocket. For the second time that day, he gathered a chakra swirl in his right hand and then carefully used his Rasengan to grind off the symbol of the hidden leaf. He grabbed a kunai out of his holster and, even more carefully, carved in two kanji. He tied it back around his head and went into the bathroom to admire his work. His forehead protector now read Akuma Shinkaru, Demonic Mirage. Naruto had thought a lot about what he was going to do about his forehead protector. Leaving it in its original state would attract attention he didn't want from the leaf, but it was what told the world he was a shinobi, and he had no intention of settling somewhere and finding some menial job. He had finally decided that he would try to build a reputation on his own merits as a shinobi without loyalty to a village, but doing that would require a distinctive look. And he would have to eliminate everything inside him that could be recognized as Uzumaki Naruto. It was in that moment, as he examined and pondered his almost unrecognizable appearance in the mirror, that Uzumaki Naruto died and Fushigi Naruto was born. It wasn't simply a decision to change a name, because Fushigi had to be everything Uzumaki wasn't. Normal people would consider this as pretending to be someone you're not, but for Naruto, it was quite the opposite. He would have to learn to not to force himself to act a certain way, and he knew it would take a while. He started to practice his facial expressions in the mirror. The first thing he tried was smiling, which he soon found he had to be careful of. A full-blown smile showed off his longer and sharper than normal canines, and although they were great for intimidation, not so good for casual conversation. He tried a scowl or two, and everything seemed okay there, though it was uncomfortable to scowl for more than a few seconds. Naruto continued on like this until supper time, practicing various expressions. This wouldn't have been a problem if Inari hadn't opened the door to call him to dinner during his attempting of the nice guy pose. He had tried to pretend he had just been examining his thumb, but Inari had kept giving him those odd looks all through the meal. Naruto announced during dinner that he had gotten work at Soba's shop to the surprise of all. He didn't go into details, just said that Akira had found a use for some of his unique skills. Apart from his announcement, supper was uneventful, as Naruto had thankfully remembered to remove his forehead protector before coming down. Naruto again quickly escaped to his room, as he wanted to get to bed early and had one more thing to do. He knew what being a missing nin could do to someone, and so he needed rules for himself, a new ninja way. He sat down with a piece of paper and started to write. Never leave a mission uncompleted. He figured this one was a given, but it felt good to write. Never do a mission because you were told or begged to. This was important, as so many missions were a waste of time and he couldn't afford to work on pity. Never go into a situation without knowing the way out. This was a rule he felt too many shinobi had died for forgetting. Never cut twice. Naruto thought of this as an analogy for life. Always be sure to succeed on the first try because you may not get a second. Naruto looked at his list with satisfaction before folding it and sliding it into the slit in his forehead protector cloth where he had only a short time ago hidden ramen tickets. He then changed and jumped into bed. As he lay there, staring at the ceiling, he reflected on how much his life had changed in a mere 7 days. It had been 2 weeks since he had stumbled into Konoha covered in blood, wasting his tears because the bastard had an unhealthy familial obsession. He had wasted a week moping about his stupid teammates, and in that same amount of time, he had forever changed his life for the better. That night, for the first time in his life, Naruto fell asleep with no fear as to what the next day would bring. It was not a good morning to be a tree. Naruto had now been in Wave Country a total of 15 days. After Metakira, his days were busy. He would get up, train in the forest with Kubikiri and his new jutsus, break for lunch, go to work, arrive home just in time for supper, and it now being at least 7 o'clock, he had a couple hours of free time, which he usually spent training anyway, before he had to get to bed. This had gone well until 2 days before when Naruto realized he needed to send his message to Konoha soon or they would come and look for him. The problem was that he needed to send it in a way that it couldn't be traced back to Wave Country. He knew that if enough effort was spent, someone would remember him and his story would be blown. He needed the Konoha records to show that he had killed himself due to emotional trauma somewhere far away from Wave, so he had come up with what he thought was a very clever plan. He had mailed his letter the day before and had been going insane with worry for the last 24 hours. He knew there were a million things that could go wrong. Unfortunately for the forest, The only way Naruto had found to vent his anxiety was to train with even more intensity, and the trees were covered in large slash marks. On the positive side, he had improved greatly and could now handle Kubikiri one-handed without looking like an idiot. Naruto practiced for another 15 more minutes before collapsing into the grass and staring at the sky, breathing heavily and letting his mind wander. It was amazing how so little time could change one's perspective so much. Naruto had always lived by hating those who killed without reason and devoting his life to fighting against them without ever realizing he was being manipulated. What had he thought the ANBU had been doing his whole life? Orochimaru had tried to destroy the leaf and assassinated Sandaime Hokage, but how many innocents had been killed in wars and skirmishes Konoha had started? How many assassinations were performed by Leaf Shinobi in a month? A week? A day? Uchiha Itachi had killed his whole clan just to measure and improve himself. But the Hyuga had been regularly enslaving and killing each other for as long as village history recorded, and they were among the most respected of the Leaf clans. If he added himself, he had the group of people that Konoha despised above all others, and there was only one thing that they had in common. It wasn't their viciousness, their cruelty, or even whom they killed. It was because they had left the village. Nookanins were hunted because once someone escaped the grasp of loyalty their village had, they realized that all shinobi were the same. That their beloved village did the same things they were told made their enemies evil. Naruto glanced at the sun and realized with a start that he would be late for work. He leaped to his feet, his profound thoughts momentarily forgotten as he ran back towards the city. Later that day in the village of the hidden sand, Kankuro very slowly and very carefully examined the house he shared with his siblings. Temari had a date. He knew this meant she wouldn't be home until at least midnight, more likely 1 or 2. Gaara was of doing whatever it was that Gaara did. No one had ever bothered to figure out what that was, but he was never around. Kankuro giggled with delight. It was rare for him to have the house all to himself. He was just building up to full-fledged maniacal laughter when the doorbell rang. Kankuro froze. He hadn't even known they'd had a doorbell. If Temari forgot her key and couldn't get in, she just broke the door down, and Gaara teleported with his sand. Kankuro opened the door to be confronted by a rather nervous-looking man in brown wearing a UPS hat. He opened the door a bit further. A worker of the United Postal Service meant a letter had been addressed to someone in his house. It was an unprecedented event. Kankuro opened the door all the way and looked at the man expectantly. Have a. The man grew more confident as he continued. Package for a Mr. Gaara of the Desert. Is he here? The man asked, obviously hoping he wasn't. Kankuro, for one of the few times in his life, was speechless. It took him a moment to realize the man wanted a reply. Gaara was upstairs, but this man didn't need to know that. Kankuro didn't want urine on the front stairs. No, but I'll make sure he gets it, Kankuro said with a fake smile. The man ran away from the house and Kankuro closed the door. What had he been doing again? A grin lit up his face. Now he remembered. He tossed Gaara's letter on the table and ran to his room, again checking that the coast was clear. He withdrew a DVD case from under his mattress and grinned stupidly over the title. Aika Aika Paradise, the motion picture. It was one of his favorite movies. He knew it was dumb, but loved it at the same time. But he rarely dared watch it with Temari, always waiting for an excuse to beat him senseless. He skipped down the stairs and tossed some popcorn into the microwave, waited impatiently while it cooked and dashed to the living room and dove onto the couch. The movie had only been on a couple of minutes when Kankuro felt a presence behind him. He felt every muscle in his body tighten as Gaara calmly walked into his field of vision, over to the recliner next to the couch and, setting his gourd on the floor, sat down. Not entirely understanding what was going on but not willing to waste his Temari free time, he started the movie again. Kankuro was normally fond of commenting on the stupidity of various characters, but felt insecure with Gaara there. This feeling was quickly alleviated, however. Don't drink the purple liquid just because it's sitting there. Have your brains leaked out of your head? Or are you just a stupid, pathetic waste of life? Gaara yelled. Kankuro looked at his little brother as if he had grown another head, which honestly would have surprised Kankuro less. Gaara was yelling at the TV, at a porn movie, at his porn movie. The next time an appropriate scene cut in, Gaara was about to speak, but Kankuro cut him off. Why would anyone with a fraction of a shred of a half-dead monkey's brain hit the big red button that says "Do not push"? The two looked at each other, both with a little respect in their eyes. This went on for about the next 30 minutes, when disaster struck. The two heard the sound of the doorknob turning and barely had time to look before a slightly dirty and very pissed-looking Temari stomped into the room. She was yelling something about stupid boys and strawberry Kool-Aid. She stormed over to the couch and sat down, shoving Kankuro over. It wasn't until a few moments later, during a break in her cursing, that she noticed what was playing on the TV. A man and a woman were in the front seat of a car, entangled in a rather odd position while the man navigated the car through a sandstorm with his feet. The room went dead silent, except for the squeaking and moaning coming from the TV. Tamari's eyes widened. That position cannot be physically possible. It was then that the Sand siblings found the first thing they had in common, commenting on dumb movies. It was the best time they had ever spent together. There was a brief interlude where Kankuro paused the movie to, with the help of some life-sized sand models courtesy of Gaara, prove that the earlier mentioned position was in fact possible, if extremely painful. As the movie ended, the three realized that they had just enjoyed a whole 2 hours of AC each other's company and were actually sad that the movie was over. That was until Gaara reached into his gourd and tossed another DVD to Kankuro. This one was Aika Aika Paradise 2. Revenge of the Squid. Kankuro looked at his brother in wonder. This isn't supposed to come out for another month. Why do you have this? Kankuro demanded to know. Gaara shrugged and gestured to the still rolling credits of the first movie. Special effects team. Visual effects. Kurosaki Ichigo. Creature effects. Abariranji. Sandstorm and weather effects. Gaara of the Desert. The two elder siblings stared at their younger brother until he raised a non-existent eyebrow at them and gestured towards the machine. It was well past 1 o'clock when the second movie finished, and they were all heading off to bed. On the way up, Gaara noticed a large envelope on the table and was surprised to see it addressed to him. He took it upstairs and ripped it open to find a second envelope and a note. Dear Gaara, this may seem a bit weird to you, but it's really important that you follow the instructions in this letter. If I ever see you again, I'll tell you why. Whatever day tomorrow is, I need you to use henge to transform into me. Then take the letter in the envelope I sent to the courier and have it sent straight to the office of the Hokage. Then go into the desert, release the henge, and go back to whatever it is you do. In a few weeks, people will come by asking about me. Tell them you only met me once, and that we talked about hate and the pain of life and other angsty stuff. Tell them I then disappeared into the desert without a trace. I owe you big time. Naruto. At the bottom of the letter was a scribbled drawing of a stick figure with fox whiskers. Gaara woke up the next day and did what Naruto asked. He really didn't have anything better to do, and figured Naruto wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. It also gave him something to do for a few weeks. He needed to practice his angst. Now, back to Wave Country. 2 more days had passed and Naruto was mostly done worrying about the letter, but instead got something else to worry about. He had overlooked one thing in his disguise, his eyes. Contrasted to the rest of his dark outfit, his eyes were a piercing shade of blue and very recognizable. The thing was, he thought knew of a way to change his eye color, but it would require a great deal of research, be very dangerous, and guarantee that he would never be allowed in Konoha again. He did a double take and realized that he really didn't have a problem with any of those. He was really starting to like being a Nugnin. Now having spent 2.5 weeks in Wave Country, Naruto started to think about departure plans. Akira had offered to make the 2 gravestones free of charge and Naruto had set them in place the day before. He had been making money by the bucket load and figured he wouldn't need to start taking missions for a while, which was good. Naruto had been spending more and more time in the forest. He had gained enough control to make Kirigakure no Jutsu a powerful, if not perfect skill, and was improving his sword technique every day. It was therein that the problem lay. The more Naruto trained, the more he realized that he had many things to work on. His sword was in need of repair. His working with Akira had taught him a thing or two about metal, and the sword had been old when Zabuza had owned it. He would have to find a master swordsmith if he wanted a good job done on a sword this unique. Most smiths, even good ones, just dealt with the basic swords, katanas, ninja toes, wakizashis, etc. His second problem was that training his body wasn't enough. He feared the first time he fought it would become painfully obvious that 3 weeks of experimentation was no match for a 200-year-old sword style. He needed to learn how to fight with his sword, not just swing it. He figured the first one was more important, because he still had his old jutsus and could fight bare-handed, but sword experience was useless if your sword was broken. Now hoping to leave Wave Country in less than 10 days, Naruto threw himself into his training even more and added into his daily schedule an hour at the local library. It wasn't as extensive as Konoha's, but Naruto found enough books on seals to give him a pretty good idea of what he would have to do to change his eye color. It wouldn't be particularly complex, just insanely dangerous. Naruto made a note to test this particular jutsu somewhere far away from, well, anything. With his having roughly planned his departure date, time sped by even faster. Before he knew it, his 4th week in Wave Country was coming to an end. Today was Friday, and Naruto planned to leave the Sunday. That meant today would be his last day working for Akira, and Naruto was surprised to find that he would miss the man. As today was his last day, he felt there was a question to ask, but he wasn't quite sure how to do it. Naruto had been careful to never give any indication as to why he was here, and for all Akira knew, Rasengan could be a beginning-level jutsu. Naruto approached what passed for his boss's office and fidgeted for a moment. Akira glanced up. "Is there something I can help you with, Naruto?" he asked. "Yeah, I've already told you that I'm leaving Sunday, but before I go, I need you to promise never to repeat any of this and answer a question without asking why." Akira gave him an odd look, but nodded. "I want to know who the best swordsmith on He Continent is, and where I could probably find him." Naruto let out a breath. If Konoha Hunter Nin were given the answer to this question and knew he had asked it, he would be thoroughly screwed. Then, to Naruto's surprise, Akira laughed. "That's what you wanted to ask." I was afraid there for a second. It's really an easy question. Kirin is by far the best. No one knows his last name, but he was the youngest of 3 brothers, all of whom were forced to flee from the hidden mist when the oldest went rogue. Kirin himself made 4 of the 7 legendary mist swords, and the middle brother, now dead, made the other 3. It's quite a well-known tale in the metalworking community. Kirin is somewhat of an idol. Akira took a breath and looked uncertain for a moment. Finding him may be more difficult. He was last known to have taken shelter in another village in the north. Some claim a place called the Village of the Hidden Sound, but I don't honestly believe such a place exists, so all I can tell you is go north. It was at this point that Naruto stopped listening. The fates, he decided, had a very twisted sense of humor. Naruto waved goodbye to the man who had been his boss and friend for the better part of a month and headed straight home. He hadn't told Tazuna of his plans to leave and didn't intend to. Naruto would be gone long before sunrise the next morning and would leave an apologetic note, claiming that a top-secret mission required his presence immediately. A PS reminded the family not to admit to anyone that he had been there, not even his own teammates. Naruto went to sleep that night with a sense of trepidation. Now having a solution, though a potentially unpleasant one, to the dilemma of how to repair Kubikiri Hocho, he had set his sights on how he might improve his proficiency with it. A regular swordmaster could teach him some basic forms, but Zabuza had not needed a style. He had simply fought with the sword as an extension of his body, and for Naruto to have any less skill would be an insult to the sword and its previous master. Naruto needed to learn from someone who knew and understood how to fight with a weapon of this size. They would have to have no associations with any hidden village friendly to Konoha, and ideally, they would also know the various water jutsus that complemented the use of such huge weapons. The longer Naruto thought about this, the more it disturbed him. The problem wasn't that he didn't know anyone who fit these criteria. The problem was that he did. Bonus: Naruto's new look. Stealthy and stylish. Hair, maroon. Vest, navy. Pants, Black. Why these three colors, you ask? All three are very distinctive in light. The hair looks red, the vest blue, and the pants black. But when night rolls around or visibility gets bad, say, in thick mist, all the colors just look dark. Anyone describing Naruto to an authority or a hunter nin would describe the cloths as dark or black. People tend to make a noticeable mistake in these situations. When told his cloths were dark, they tend to automatically assume the cloths were all the same color. The next obvious question is, why the vest with no shirt underneath? To which the answer is also quite simple. Fighting with an 80-pound sword requires mobility, and if one isn't going to wear any armor, why bother with a shirt? The ninja vest is really a requirement, but anything else is just something to get in the way. It should be noted that Zabuza never wore anything on his upper body, but he had Haku to carry all the emergency supplies. The open vest also allows his seal to show, which adds to his intimidation. The next morning, Naruto woke up at 3 a.m. He carefully and quietly packed his few possessions into a small duffel bag Tazuna had given him to keep his clothes in. He zipped it up and crept downstairs. He left his notes sitting on the kitchen table, where Tazuna would undoubtedly find it when he came down for his morning tea. Saying a silent goodbye to the house and the people who lived there, he walked out of the house, closing the door behind him. Kubikiri Hocho was, as always, exactly where Naruto had left it on the roof. Naruto had started to feel more comfortable with the sword nearby and felt nervous when it wasn't within his range of perception. Naruto stood atop the house and looked around at his surroundings. He imagined all the sleeping citizens of Wave Country, completely oblivious to the one who would be leaving them tonight. Naruto jumped down from the roof and started to run. He ran out of the city into the forest much as he had run from another city but a short month ago. But there was a difference. As he had fled Konoha, he had been plagued by memories of the past. But this time, as he left the still sleeping port city behind him, his thoughts were on the future. As the morning plodded on, Naruto continued to run through the forest. He was now in Fire Country and probably would be for quite some time. It was the only direct land route from Wave to Sound, and Naruto wasn't good with ships. Going the most direct way would take him within 40 miles of Konoha, but Naruto wasn't prepared to be that cocky yet, so he had planned a slightly out-of-the-way route that would keep him a safe distance away. As the sun rose towards the peak of its path and noon approached, Naruto realized he'd been stalling long enough. After all, it had been hours since he had seen any signs of human life. Stealing his resolve, he set down his bag and soared on the ground near a particularly tall tree and ran another minute through the forest. Sweaty and out of breath, but by no means out of stamina, Naruto sought to calm himself. He was about to attempt an experimental jutsu and wanted to at least be calm so he didn't make any mistakes. He closed his eyes and calmed his spirit. His eyes shot open, and in one fluid motion, he bit his thumb and streaked a line of blood down the seal on his belly. He moved his hands faster than the normal human eye could track. There were 37 hand seals. He finished on the dragon seal and called out to the empty forest. Shikafujin Ki. He found himself in the familiar lands.